Intro to Entity Framework code first. First thing we're going to do is create a blank solution. So we're going to go to File, New Project. We're going to go down to Other Project Types, Visual Studio Solutions, and we're going to name this one Brown Bag. The second thing we're going to do is create our test project. And this one is going to be called brownbag.test. Next, we're going to get rid of this test method, and we're going to use a snippet that I created called test.mn. We're going to go to the arrange section, type var user equals new user. Now this user isn't created yet, so what we're going to want to do is create another class library that will be used to call which will be called from the test project, and we'll call the entity framework classes. So we'll go to Add, New Project, Windows, Class Library. I'm going to name it brownbag.bl. Okay. I'm going to rename this class to user.c#. I'm going to have it rename the actual class name inside the file for us. We're going to go back to our test project. We're going to put our cursor over the user, and we're going to do some resharper stuff here. So if you don't have resharper, you might not be able to really follow along, but you should be able to pick up the concept. So we're going to do Alt-Enter, and this is going to say reference brownbag.bl and use brownbag.bl.user. Now what that's going to do is create a using directive up top, and then also add the reference for us. So we're going to hit OK. And as you see, it created the using directive here, and it actually put brownbag there, brownbag.bl there. We're going to get rid of this guy because we don't need it. Alright, if you're following along, we're on step 7, and that created the references for us. The next thing we're going to do is go to our act. Now this is where it's going to actually do something. So we have our user ID equals user.create, and we're going to pass the DTO in there. That's not created yet. Now as you see, this create method and this local variable is not created yet. So what we're going to do is create the create method that's in the user class. Now to do this, we're going to continue with some resharper shortcuts. So we're going to go over the create, we're going to do Alt-Enter, we're going to create method user.create, which as you see, it actually created this method for us. The next thing we're going to do is we don't want an object return, we want an actual int return. And we're going to get rid of this not implemented exception, and for now just return 0. Now if we go back to our test, we'll see that the create method, it notices it now because it was created, but we still have this user DTO. So what we're going to do is, same thing, enter local variable. As you see, it's in the act section, so we don't want it there. Control X, go up a couple spots, Control V, and what this is going to be is the code to do this will be var user DTO equals new user DTO with an object initialization of username equals, and we're just going to put unit test underscore plus GUID dot new GUID dot toString. Now, as you see, this user DTO is not created. So what we're going to do is put our mouse over user DTO, Alt Enter, and it's going to say create class user DTO. Now that puts it below. We still have this username that's created. So same thing, Alt Enter, create property. And that also puts it below. The next thing we're going to do is, this isn't a bad spot there. So what we're going to do is move that to a better location. We want to put it in brownbag.bl. So what we'll do is put our cursor to the right over here, and we're going to have to do function. We're going to do F6 and move to folder, and you'll get this other dialog, and we'll have to change it to brownbag.bl. Click next. You'll see that it removed that class, and now he's over here. Okay. Save these files off. The next thing, so if we go into this create, it still has an object coming in here. Now, since we created this user DTO, we can actually say it is a user DTO. The final thing we need to do is go back to our unit test. We are going to assert, so we do assert dot is true, user ID greater than 0. Build it, make sure everything builds okay. And what we're going to do is run it. Now this should fail because obviously we're returning 0, and this will not be true. Run it, and it failed. One thing I forgot to do as part of the first step in the blog post is change this name. So really what we're doing as part of this is add user valid username returns user ID. Alright, so build that, everything should be okay. So we got our test going, we got our create method that basically returns nothing. We have our DTO that we're going to pass into our create method. And if you're following along on the steps, we are right at the end of creating our test. So now that we have all that done, we're going to start getting into our entity framework stuff. Okay, so what we need to do next is add another class library project. And we're going to call this brownbag.el. We're going to delete this class file. Now what we need to do is, as part of entity framework, we need to get the assemblies in. So what we need to do is we need to use something called a package manager console. To get there, we go to Tools, Library, Package Manager, and then Package Manager Console. Now this gives us a way to communicate with, in this case, NuGet, and get the correct assemblies down and add them to our project. So once we're in there, we'll see this PM command prompt here for Package Manager. And what we're going to do is install package entity framework. Now you can specify the version here, but we're just going to leave it like this to get the newest version. You also notice the default project that it has here is the test project. Now we're going to do this for each one of our projects. So you see entity framework was added here. We'll do that to the business layer and also DL. So after that's done, you see that each project has the reference, the entity framework assemblies. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is go back to our DL and add class. And we're going to call this class brown bag context. So inside this brown bag context, this is where you're gonna inherit from DB context, set the connection string that this should use, and set your properties to your tables that you want created. So we change this public class brown bag context inherit from DB context. We are going to create this constructor. Now inside this space is where you have your name brown bag context, and that is going to be the name that's in our config file, which is it's the name in the config file for our connection string. So now that we have that set, we're going to open our app config. We're going to go down. I have the connection string already created. Here's that brown bag context. Save that. We're also going to go to our test. Add it there as well. Save it. Then go to back to our brown bag context, and we're going to create a property. Now, as you can see, this user is not created. This is not the same user over here, but this is going to define use a user that we define in here that's going to basically basically have the properties within our database. So once again, we're going to go to Alt Enter. We're going to create class user. We're going to move this to another file, user.cs. As you can see, it put it here right next to this. Now, folder structure, we're gonna, you can come back and change this, or even create a new project for your DTOs. But right now, we're going to keep them side by side. So the next thing is to actually create our properties in our user class here that our entity framework is going to be using. I have that already in my clipboard, so we have to add a couple using directives, and this is basically saying this first user ID is going to be the key, and we want to create it as an identity in the database. The next field, the username field, is a string, which will be converted, well not converted, but created in the database as a varchar, or I think in this case an n varchar, with a max length of 50. So we'll go ahead and save that. Now we'll need to go and add a reference to brownbag.dl from or within brownbag.bl, so it's going to be communicated with it. Next thing we're going to do is go back to our user class in here and actually create some real code. of that on my clipboard, and basically what that does is creates a user, adds that user to this user's DB context, and then saves the changes, and then we'll return the user ID after it made that change. So the database that we have will be starting off with an identity of 1. So our first record should come back with 1. Now before we get there, we need to create a migration. And what that means is we need the database to create the users table with these columns in it. So what I'm going to do is show you we have an existing brown bag database with no tables in it. So you'll see there's no tables in it. So to get that table created, we need to first create a migration. So we're going to go back to our package manager console, type in add migration, user table creation. Now this user table creation is just a name, and that will be appended to a section over here. One thing I forgot to do is we need to enable migration. So after I hit enter for enable migration, you'll see over here under the detail that there'll be a migrations folder with some configuration class in it. Okay, so we have the migrations with some configuration class in it. So we're going to go back and add migration, user table creation. So what that's going to do is create this file for us. And we'll go ahead and look at this file. It didn't create anything in the table yet, and I'll show you that here. I'm going to refresh it. Still nothing. But we'll see what this up method does is it creates the table users with these fields. And primary key is going to be user ID. And then we have this down method, which I haven't done a lot of research in, but it would basically drop that table. So if we wanted to back out or reverse the restore the way it was before this actual migration. So we'll go ahead and close that, close a couple of these other ones. And to get this into the database, we need to run a command called update database. Okay, and you see here you can specify a flag called -verbose, and it would actually create the SQL statements that it ran, and you'll be able to see what it's actually doing. Now, if I go back to the database, I can refresh this guy, and you see that we have our users table here with our columns. Now, if you look at the design of this guy, you'll see that it is set to an identity, and it starts at 1. Username and varchar 50, because we put a max length of 50 on there. Now if we select, there should be nothing in there. But now we want to go back to our test. If we run it, if everything went smoothly, we should, actually we'll debug. If everything goes smoothly, we should come back with the first user ID, which should start at 1. We're going to debug this test. We're going to create our user detail. So we see our unit test. This should be the name that's inserted into the database. We're going to go to our create method. It passed in that user DTO. Create this brown bag.dl user. It adds that user to the user's context. It's it. And then it would return user.userid. So in this case, 1 in unit test. So it should make it back all the way to our test. And the user ID is greater than 0. And that will eventually show up as passed. So here's our successful test. So that's basically it. That's the intro to Code First. Entity Framework Code First. And you'll see if I execute this now, we have a user ID of 1 and that unit test. And I can run that test over and over again. I'll run it a couple more times. And it should always come back as successful. Just a couple more times. And execute it. We should see 3 guys in there. So that's pretty much it. Hope this helps you out with a starting point for your Entity Framework Code First implementation.